My name is Richa Sachdev. I work for JPMorgan Chase, and I lead data reporting and process automation team. I love my coffee plain black first thing in the morning, and as the day progresses, I gravitate towards a latte or a shaken espresso with oat milk.
Welcome back to another MLOps community podcast. I am your host, Dimitri Os, and today, what a wonderful conversation with Richa. If you've been following along, I am currently on the island of Crete, and I have been saying there's some funny Greek things that happen when you are in Greece. And one of them I will bring up today before we talk about the excellent conversation that I had with Richa is all about why buildings just get abandoned and then they don't get finished being built. And so you've got these concrete structures in the middle of such a beautiful scenery. And it's like, what happened there? They're just going to leave it like that? Or a building is almost finished and the rooftop has a bunch of what are they called? Rebar coming out of the top of it. I don't understand. I do not understand what's going on here. I heard it is because of property taxes. If you never finish the house, then you don't have to pay property taxes. So people say they're going to build another level to the house and then they don't pay property taxes. But I would love to know, for those Greek people that are listening or they are out there, I know there's a ton of Greeks in the ML world. What is going on here? I do not get it at all. And don't tell me it's because of the austerity measures, because I was here in the 90s too, and there was still a bunch of randomly half-built concrete structures. Okay, so now let's turn the page, finish that part of my Greek question marks that I have in my head, and let's go to the conversation that I had with Richa, which we're about to get into. So one thing that I really appreciate about Richa and the way that she sees things is that she came from the software engineering background, and she is now very heavily immersed, steeped in business. And so she understands, and she walks me through this whole entire podcast was basically her showing me how knowing the tech is very valuable, but the other piece that is more valuable now at her current job in the financial sector is knowing the business side of things. And so she has to understand very deeply the business goals and metrics that they're hitting. And then she can translate it into the product design decisions and just the technology decisions. So I appreciate her talking to me about that and how she looks at it and how she makes decisions when she is confronted with them. She spoke to us about data platforms. And this is something that it got popular, of course, when Andrew Yang was talking about it a few years ago. And I think it almost has been swept under the rug a little bit because of LLMs. And I get the feeling more people will be talking about it and it will become a huge part of the conversation soon enough, maybe by the time this podcast is out, because the data platform is your foundation. And without a strong data platform, you can't do anything else. It doesn't matter what GPT model you're using. If you really want to have that moat and you want to be able to use your proprietary data, you need to have fundamentals. So Richa walks us through how she did that at a few of her jobs, and I love talking to Richa. So I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. And as always, if you thought this was useful, just share it with one friend. That would mean the world to me. All right, let's jump into it. So, all right, Richa, talk to me about your story, because I know we met probably a few years ago. Yeah. And you were coming from Vanguard at the time. Mm-hmm. And I love that you have been working in the financial department. So I want to dig deep on some of the regulations and all that good stuff. I think I might even use Vanguard, to be honest, and that is another plus. And I just want to hear how'd you get into data?
Yeah, absolutely. And side note, if you're considering using Vanguard funds for investment, do it. If you don't have a 529 for your kids, do it. Vanguard
I thought
has.
you were going to give me some influencer code, like use Richa29 at the end of, vanguard.com/Richa29 to get 20% off your Vanguard ETF.
I am not giving any financial advice. I'm just keeping it very high level. But how did I get into data? So let me tell you a little bit about my story. Didn't start with data. My background is computer science and bachelor's, master's, and one of my favorite subjects always was databases, data architecture. And at that time when I graduated, data was not big data. It was still at a smaller scale, but I still loved visualizing, analyzing data. And little did I know that 5-7 years down the line, I was going to get into the world of data. But when I started out of college, I worked as a software developer. I did production support. I did change management. I did development from ground up. I was also part of a company that was like that was a company that was providing service for TV guides, etc. So thinking about like the APIs and how we were deploying things. So I learned a lot of best practices there. Then I went into a healthcare company where I took it upon myself to figure out which are the teams that are doing analytics. My job was to take an existing legacy application and move it over to Java and Spring Boot. So that was like, again, very heavy duty coding. But there were analytics teams that were taking a look at electronic medical records. How do we extract data from them? How do we move it to Hadoop at that point in time? How do we run like Hive and Impala queries? And then I got entered into the world of cloud at a very early age when cloud was just hitting. AWS was becoming like a buzzword. So I was lucky enough to have very strong, deep in software engineering, in understanding what does it mean to write code with best practices, version control, change management, and things like that. And then when I entered into Vanguard, I interviewed for the role of data engineering. And I was the only engineer at that point of time. And the department that I joined was sort of like a startup at Vanguard. So the mandate was for us to establish our core competency with data, and then think about hiring data scientists, think about doing prescriptive, descriptive ML, and then going into predictive. And that was like the overall journey I had for 5 years while I was at Vanguard. And that was the tipping point where I got into data, where I got into machine learning. That's not what I studied, because when I was in school, those were not the courses that were available. So a lot of it was like learning on the job. But I had very deep roots in technology. So at this point of time, if you think of leaders who lead very successful machine learning engineering teams that are doing MLOps, infrastructure to support all of these, it's very difficult to find folks who have knowledge of both. And through life, through like knocking on the right doors, having the right mentorship, etc., I found myself at a hybrid of these two roles. So that's how I got into data. And then once I got into data, I never looked back. And I've had like different roles, which I can talk to you about. But yeah, I'm so happy that I love data from day one. I'm in there and I continue to make my career and learn as I progress.
You thought to yourself, I imagine, wow, there's so many more bugs that I can deal with in data. This is going to keep me busy for a long time.
Long time.
You said something there and you kind of glossed over it, but I want to dig in, which is around the journey at Vanguard and how you were setting up the foundation and you had this nice little motif, the prescriptive, descriptive, and then predictive.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Prescriptive is when you are working with the business and business knows the data in and out, and it is sizable, digestible chunks, and they can tell you what sort of analysis they want to see. They have, for example, the right KPIs or metrics in mind, which they can say, hey, data and reporting team, operations team, can you slice and cut the data for me in a format that we can use for decision making? Descriptive is that what you see in the data the data analysts, data engineers able to see and just create some rough distribution, rough graphs, visualizations on their own, and then present it to the business and have a dialogue as to which data points are important so that those can be then changed into automated dashboards, etc. So one is like business driven, one is data driven, but it's still what data is trying to tell you, what you see it as is. Predictive is where you see historical data, you see the trends, you see the patterns, you apply your algorithms on top of it, you do your tuning, you figure out the right algorithm, you figure out what the high-level business problem you're trying to solve, and then you predict based on top of that what could be a potential outcome. So things like that. Hey, when a customer calls, what would be the next topic they would be interested in? That's not what I can look in snapshot of time right now and say, but I have to look back in time, understand the customer journey, understand various data points, their demographics, their transactional history, and many other things, and say, okay, what would be the next best message they would want to hear? What is the channel they would respond better to? Would it be web? Would it be mobile? Some other digital channel, for example, or very real life situation is going to be, what is the next best ad I should be showing you on the Instagram, for example? If I look about you or what you viewed right now, I can tell you something, but the juice is when you analyze someone's historical trends and data, and then you predict what treatment you would respond to the best.
And so you, as a data engineer that were going in there and setting up these data foundations, how did the system look as you went through each one of these perspectives that you were looking at data through?
Yeah, there's a lot that you could unpack here, so I'll try my best. So think about it as like 3 high levels: operational data, analytical data, and data that's used for machine learning at a high level. So operational data is day-to-day data. How many clicks do you have? How many people responded to a particular email? How many people clicked on the like button, for example? That's the day-to-day sort of things that you can say when you have an offer, how many sign up for it, etc. Day-to-day. That's more operational in nature. And that's used to make a lot of, that's very, very powerful in making decisions. And the general mode is through reports and dashboards, etc. Then is analytical, which is a higher level of operational where you start aggregating data on monthly, quarterly, yearly level and start looking at trends, start comparing your historical data to now, how your offers or your trends are going, your KPIs, downward trend, upward trend, how do you make data-driven decisions at the business level. When you start thinking about powering your machine learning models, that's historical data. Huge sums of data that comes into play for many years. We've always heard that data archival is important because it reduces the compute, it reduces the storage. But you have to be very mindful that the more the data you give to an algorithm, of course, in limit, you're not going to give 10 years worth of data. It might even choke, forget about, I'm not talking about LLMs, but the traditional machine learning. There you have to think about how do you store the data in warehousing, how do you surface the data with low latency, how do you make the data available for training, etc. And there's always this concept of ETL and ELT. For operational data, for analytical data, if you load the data and then you work on the transform data. So you work with your IT teams and say, hey, do this transformation, create these views, create these tables for me. You can work off of it. For machine learning, it's more so as much raw data as possible you can put in one place and create a semantic layer on top of that. And the transformation is something that the individual teams can do so that the meaning is not lost when you transform already the data. So all of it requires like different data architecture. And you must have always heard of like the raw layer, the semantic layer, the analytical layer. So very close attention needs to be paid to that. So when I was at Vanguard, we always had to keep these use cases in mind and work with individual data producers as to where is the data, what format you're storing the data in, how are you cataloging the data, what schema is it in, for example, how back of the history you're keeping. So those are the things that are important. And the tools itself are very different. For analytical operational, you could use, let's say if you're on premise, like your traditional SQL servers and things like that. When you take it to the cloud, of course, there are tools that are there too. But like for your machine learning, there's a lot like Snowflake, DBTs. Those are the tools that come into play that have that powerhouse of storing that much data, giving you the capability to query it easily and then consume it within your models. And now there's a concept of like data mesh. Everything earlier was centralized when you used to think about like big data warehouses. And again, something that was very easy to plug and play for operational and analytical. But for machine learning, you don't only need the data that's in your department, you need to join it with, let's say, other things about the customer, the marketing data, things like that. And then data mesh comes into play where the data is decentralized. And how do you think about like a microservice to a monolith, right? That's the change that we went through. Data mesh is that for the data, where data resides in individual teams and departments, and then the consumers have to figure out how to like access that data, how to join it, how to use it for decision making. Like I said, there's a lot to pack here, like on the data architecture, the tools, the centralization, the decentralization. And then it gets even more complicated when you think about unstructured data, because a lot of our data is unstructured. Now, we look into voice data, calls data, for example, email data, complaint data, social media data. So how do we all store it together? How do we join that, create that thread between your relational databases and your non-relational databases? And then when you're extracting information, where do you store it? So there's a lot that goes into thinking about not just how you design your systems, but your data. So that's why like data architecture is a very nuanced field in itself.
Well, I gotta know. I mean, you practically put the next question on the table, and I'm intrigued to think about what and how did you do that, joining these unstructured data and the structured, and knowing like certain databases have their strengths for one and other databases have strengths for others, or it's just like blob storage and you throw everything into blob storage and try and work from there. How do you think about that? And inevitably you're going to be getting a million databases, I imagine. And so how do you like keep from just adding another database to service a need when it comes up?
Yeah. So back in the day when we were doing it, we were evaluating different databases like, Mongo, for example, because we had a lot of documents that we were trying to store. But then they were not just like challenge of integrating data across different databases. It was just a challenge of architecture, security, and things like bringing those managed services or databases in-house. So that was a reason why we put brakes on that. But yes, it is a question like, let's see, even if we were to bring it in, how are we going to join it all? It's a difficult question because how do you keep all of them refreshed at the same time? How do you make sure that the primary key or the identifiers are the same? And then it's a lot of data is loaded with PII. How do you unidentify that in unstructured data and store it? It is not an easy problem. There is no silver bullet to it. And every company does it in a little bit of a customized way because the rules change, the access controls change, etc. So when we did it back in the day, we used file storage. Like we uploaded a lot of them on the S3 bucket. Then we had programs that were constantly extracting the information, parsing, and just sizing it down to digestible bite size so that when our algorithms were reading the data, they were not reading the entire blob, but they were reading the most condensed, juiciest information that was present in there. And then when we were storing the information that we were deriving from it, then that's the place where we were making sure that the insights from it were being stored in a place where if we were thinking about you as an end customer, Demetrius, and if I wanted to store your information about your transaction, what pages you visited, etc., the insights from your call or your email was also being stored in one place itself. So if I think about you, I think about you in a 360 frame. So it was more at the output of if the model had to like ping real time and say, hey, give me all the insights about you. That's what we optimized more than the storage layer. Our models were not getting refreshed real time. There was a lot of batch, so it left us with the time to perfect the upstream and focus more on the downstream, where it was more critical to make sure that all the data was in one place and easy to find. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. And of course, like, now I want to, that's been your history. Now you're doing equally as cool stuff and you're at Chase, right? So I would love to go through what's your day-to-day now? What are you doing? And we can go from there.
Yeah. My work at Chase, of course, there's a lot that I can borrow from my previous life. But I must say it's a lot of fun because I'm in Chase Reward, your credit cards, everybody I tell them, like, oh, you're the one who manages all of my data. So my day-to-day is data reporting, process automation, where, remember I talked to you about the operational analytical data. So we're facing those quick insights to the business for decision making. That's what I focus on. But through that, I need to be very deeply ingrained in the business processes and knowledge of the business, which I really enjoy. That's something that I did not do in my previous life. I was very front and center with technology and how the business is going to use. But now I have to really understand the card business and the reward space.
Yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Aparna, founder of Arise. And the best way to stay up to date with MLOps is by subscribing to this podcast.
It's a lot of fun, like brainstorming ideas, because when I come to process automation, it's important for me to see that how a business conducts work end to end. What are the touch points? What are the manual steps? Where are the errors? How do we bring in resiliency from a control standpoint? So my thought process has changed a little bit, where I have to keep business, front of my mind, but yet keep the wheels turning. How do we automate? Do we automate based on a workflow with a lot of low-code, no-code solutions available? Do we think about robotic process automation? Or is it the third category where we're trying to automate? How do we listen to calls? How do we drive insights? How do we figure out our pain points? How do we marry that with the customer journey on web or mobile and see where their dropouts are and their calling to reduce the call volume? That's on the machine learning side. So my journey, I have not been at Chase for a very long period of time, but my journey has been to figure out different buckets in which my work can reside. So there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of room to make an impact and create that growth. But I am a core technical person in a business organization. So I'm also trying to figure out my space and make sure that we continue to keep business front and center, yet think about the technology solutions to propel it at the same time.
All I heard from everything you just said was that you can get me free first-class upgrades on my transatlantic flights. Is that true? Did I just hallucinate that one?
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah,
I have like some... I can't give that for myself, but I can get it for you, Demetrius.
Yeah, you can go in the back end and tweak some numbers, right? That data, it's immutable or is immutable? Let's be honest. So that is fascinating because I am a huge proponent, and I know a lot of people in the community are also very gung-ho about how, as a machine learning engineer and even a data scientist, anyone who is trying to show value with these models that they're putting out, you really have to have a strong story on how it affects the business. And it seems like you're going at this through the lens of, let's figure out the business needs before we figure out the cool tech that we can throw at it and what we can do with technology.
You are very correct. And that is a struggle that I lived and breathed when we were at Vanguard.
Yeah.
We were creating a lot of cool things. We know what we were trying to solve, but it was getting hard for us to translate it to the business. So data literacy was a huge struggle. The other struggle was many a times folks saying, well, let's bring the biggest and the baddest and the strongest data scientists, and then data many a times is an afterthought. And that also leads to a lot of latency in speed to market, because if your foundational data is not correct, if you haven't thought about the business needs and how you're going to be using the data, then all is lost. And this opportunity at Chase is perfect because it is giving me a chance to understand the business problems, understand the user journeys, marry that to the data that we have currently, figure out how do we want to store that data for best optimization, and then we're going to continue to incrementally deploy more nuanced algorithms, machine learning techniques to drive insights. Right now, we're focused on the basic heuristics to learn from it, very simple data analysis, a little bit manual, human in the loop. But as we go, we want to make sure that we have a very strong business story, very strong business impact that we're able to articulate and show progress and continue to put in efforts into our data strategy, tooling strategy, resource and bench strength strategy to be able to go full steam.
So as you're breaking down projects and you're trying to figure out, hey, can I add value here with whatever the data may be? Maybe it's just analytics and it's a report, or maybe it's a full-on machine learning model. What are some things that first come to your mind as far as metrics that you want to track and how you're able to make sure that those metrics are important and you can track them?
Are you talking in terms of the data metrics that we want to track, or are you talking about business metrics?
I think it's more business metrics, to be honest. It feels to me like at the end of the day, what you want to do, right, is show the ROI on your projects. And you want to be able to say, look, we did all this work. It was a pain in the butt. We had to create new forms of capturing data. We had to bring on this new pipeline, and this is all this stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm guessing your boss or your boss's boss, they don't really care about the cool data transform that you're doing in this new pipeline. They just want to hear, how much money is it saving me? Or what are the things that they're looking to hear? Is it how are we reducing churn? What are the big business metrics that you're trying to hit, so that, I guess, how many people are getting free flight upgrades? And that might be one business metric that you're looking at.
Yeah. So there are different parts of it. So without getting too deep into our business, but the different journeys, right? What at a high level is you earning points? At a high level is you using it. And the whole management around it in terms of how many were redeemed, how many were combined, reducing the fraud around that, and how many people had easier interaction with our ultimate reward system that we are trying to measure through the call data, the reduction in calls or complaints, etc. So those are the higher level things that I can, in full transparency share here. But there's a different angle I can talk to you about. Is there's a component of process automation as well, right?
Yeah.
And it's it affects our storyline at the end of the day. Because if we automate, we reduce the number of errors. We reduce the latency and when and how people are awarded their points, or their points are clawed back, or they get the tax associated with, etc. So at a very foundational level, if we make our processes a lot more automated, if they are governed, and we have the right metrics to capture that in terms of before, how long did it take for us to run the task end to end? When we've automated, how are we reducing the time to run it? How often did we have to QC it, or how error prone was it? Have we automated the quality checks? Or in terms of were there any control or audit findings that we are closing? So those are the sort of the things that are also front and center. And the reason is because the end customer might not be seeing it directly. It might not be a tangible impact, but it flows through the system and will have a tangible impact. So those are the sort of the things also at the automation level that my team is very involved with, and the senior leaders are very interested in figuring out, because it does affect our bottom dollar at the end of the day.
It feels like the wise way of doing it, and not getting caught up in other things and seeing like, wow, okay, these are really the things that matter. And this is what we need to think about. And the end user experience is the one that we want to optimize for. And then there's all these other parts that the end user probably doesn't even think about or doesn't need to think about, because again, you're optimizing for that end user experience. And so do they need to be brought in on this part? Well, maybe not. And I imagine you experiment with those different kinds of things. When you are setting up these, because I guess there's two pieces to this, that you have to go through this process and figure out what you want to set up and how you want to set it up. And once you've identified something that you need to set up, what are some of the key trade-offs that you're looking at right now and that you're thinking about? And again, this can be, since you have this vantage point of being so close to the business, yet having the understanding of the engineering side, it feels like you can think about a lot of different trade-offs, whether it's a technology trade-off or it's just, hey, if we have a different user experience, that could be a trade-off. So how do you look at those different trade-offs right now in your day-to-day?
The way I think about this is at different levels. One is the technology that's available for us. And a lot of it is legacy. A lot of it is also modern. We are at this juncture where we have to interface between the two. So the trade-off always is, should we rush to push everything into cloud, modernize it, or should we figure out first, how do we get the reports and the important decisions out to the business as soon as possible while we continue to work on the modern tool stack? No surprise, time is limited, resources are limited. As a leader, I'm always grappled with the decision making or the catch-22 of where do we use our resources to the best of their potential. Should we pivot? Should we not get carried away by the future state, yet focus on the state that we're in right now? And that's a decision that I cannot make in isolation. I have a lot of stakeholders that I work with, my product partners, my product teams that rely on the decisions that we give to them. So there needs to be a recognition of all the players. There needs to be a recognition of when to involve them for all of the decision making. Then the bigger the company, the more spread out the work can be. So our data modernization work has a lot of players, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So sometimes it gets very, very hairy to figure out what progress is being made, what team is doing what, and where does the ownership and accountability lie. So bringing it all together is like another very arduous task that takes away from time. So even though it is not something that is in my purview to solve, but it directly affects me. So the trade-off is, I see it. Should I talk about it? Should I bring it up? Or should I let wind blow and see where it's going? But as a senior leader, it is incumbent upon me to identify room for growth and opportunities and bring all the right parties together for like decision making. From the business side of view, like I was mentioning, we have a lot of legacy tools and the knowledge is very centralized with some folks. So how do we think about breaking the monolith and dividing it into domain-driven architecture, microservice-driven architecture? Think about like data with it as well from a data architecture, data mesh perspective that we talked about. What are the pros and cons of it? Like having that as an open dialogue when we do like data center migration. That's another thing that we constantly think about, and we evaluate the pros and cons and what timeline should we go about, what roadmap item should we have. So those are like some of the things that we have to bear in mind. So it's not just technology decisions, it's not just business decisions. They have to go hand in hand because technology decision drives business and vice versa. But which battle to pick when and what to focus on is something, it's part art, part science. But the message is that the more senior you are, the more interplay you have to understand and then make sure that you have the consensus from right parties, understand the impact on every party, and then do your best.
Yeah, it feels to me like if you can fix it without having to go into technology, that's probably the easier route, considering if you have a lot of legacy and you don't know how long it's going to take to dig in and change the processes around the tech and everything that goes with it, and ideally not break anything along the way if you are trying to mess with the tech. So it's like it's almost, I could see it being like you would lean more towards, can we find another solution that is not trying to do something with tech, and then after you've exhausted your creativity there, you go down the rabbit hole of, okay, if we were to change the tech on this, what would it look like?
Yeah, and that's true because in our world, our systems directly affect the end user. If you don't see the rewards you have, you go on Amazon, you're not able to make a purchase, we are going to affect the end customer like this. It's not like a few days later you're going to hear about it and we can remediate it. It's right there, right now. So it's like fight or fight. So we have to like fix it. And parallelly, we have to keep thinking of how do we advance in our technology? How do we advance in our processes? So, yep, that's definitely a challenge. And like I said, that time is limited, resources are limited, and budget is limited. So we have to be pragmatic about how we go about it.
Always. Yeah. I wonder also, though, at the same time, so how much do you think about this idea of, after I just said, you try not to touch the technology because if you can do something on a different level, then it's probably going to be faster to implement and potentially you can have a quicker win. But at the same time, I wonder about how you analyze, and maybe you have people that will go do full-on reports, and maybe this is with the product people, the stakeholders you were speaking about. Some of the other stakeholders are talking about, with this legacy tooling that we have, it takes us way longer than it should to do something. And if we had a new tool, or if we had a new way of doing this on our tech side, then we could cut the time of implementation or the time that our engineers are spending on this problem down significantly. And that, because of the cost of labor, is going to increase our ROI.
Yep. And those are conversations we do. And our product partners have their own corresponding tech teams who understand these systems. Our senior leaders, even above me, understand the pain points of this system. And we always come together to talk about, what does our future look like? What does the modernization of our data, modernization of our tools and technologies look like? And if it is something that's going to be way too cumbersome to pull apart and create into different functions or domains, let's not mess with it. Let's try to create something lightweight on the side and then run them in parallel. If they're working, then unplug from the first legacy one and plug it to the next one. But yes, this conversation or this thought is just not with me. It is with our product, tech partners, senior leaders, because we do see that it's not just the time it takes to get it done, but how does the data flow? Sometimes it's so hard for us to create a story with the data because the data gets exchanged with a lot of different technologies or solutions or platforms, so as to speak. So reconciling them gets hard as well. And with any legacy, there is tech debt. And then any organization has to work with that tech debt while continuing to innovate. And that is something that we do as well.
So the big question here is, I've heard rumors that some banks still operate with COBOL. Does Chase use COBOL anywhere in their code?
I'm sure. Some mainframes are probably hard to get rid of. Talk about job security, right?
Exactly. The COBOL engineer is probably getting paid a good chunk of cash to stay there and babysit that thing.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be, honestly. And I don't even know if it's just like banks. And I think a lot of big institutions are going to have that. Financial industry for sure. But yeah, I mean, I'll be surprised if there are other industries who have completely washed their hands off of mainframe and COBOL and all that fun stuff.
All that fun stuff. Yeah. Depending on what you
That's a good question,
fun.
Demetrius.
Yeah. So, well, this has been awesome, Richa. I appreciate you chatting with me and helping me to understand really like how you think through things, because that was the coolest takeaway that I've got from this conversation. So
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me this chance to talk to you and to share my day-to-day life and what I learn, what I don't learn. And it's going to be a work in progress with every different role, every different department, every different company. There's going to be something new. Sometimes you focus on tech, sometimes you focus on business. But I quite honestly enjoy it to become as a wholesome leader, that it's important to be able to connect the two very well.
That 360 view is huge.
Yep.
And it allows you to leverage so many more insights.
Completely agree.
Hey, this is Mike Del Balso, co-founder and CEO of Tecton. MLOps community is the best way to stay in the loop on the latest MLOps news and best practices. It's also a great way to connect with experts and get support from an amazingly helpful community. Subscribe and stay in the loop.